All right, ladies and gentlemen, it's Thursday, and you are on a special edition of the MSP Initiative because I have a gentleman on the line that, quite frankly, is hard to get a hold of because he is in demand, they say. I'd like to welcome Mr. Ryan Burton from PAX 8. How you doing, Ryan?
I can't complain, George. Things are good, man. How are you?
Hey, we're just before winter time, so I'm telling everybody to take advantage of the mild weather before we start seeing snow, at least where I'm from.
Yeah, we had like last week. It got a little chilly. Got to wear a scarf and a hat. It was fun. It's a good time.
Yeah, I say, but that once you get past Halloween, all bets are off here in the Northeast for sure.
Oh yeah.
Right on. So, interesting times, right? I mean, there's just, we're still kind of on the tail end, hopefully tail end of COVID. Obviously things are a lot more clear nowadays than they were, earlier in the year. Your company, specifically have been primarily working remote, like 500 plus employees, right?
That's right. Yeah, we did a pretty drastic. Quickly, we moved all of our employees we were very much a company culture that was around inside the office, right? Like 90% of our employees were in Colorado, in Denver. We did have a couple satellite offices and some remote people, but majority was in our Denver office. And yeah, within like a few days, we made the decision to have everyone work from home, which is about 500 people. So,
wow, that's got to be a lot of movement in a short period of time, especially with communicating the plan, right, to all of those people simultaneously. I think I even saw a post not too far back where you guys had like an all hands company wide meeting and not a single person had to unmute. How about that?
We're getting good at it, man.
That's good.
I think we're figuring it out.
Oh, that's good. I mean, listen, people are getting used to the tech, right? So obviously why don't we zoom back for a second? So for the people who don't know who you are, why don't you do a quick intro, maybe a little walk down memory lane. Where did you start in the industry to maybe how you got to where you're at today? And then we'll get into the meat, as in where are things now and where are they going from a technology standpoint?
Sure. Yeah. Well, I'll start with, I graduated college at a very hard time, which was like right during the recession in '08. Had no place to get a job, period. And the only thing I could find at the time was door-to-door sales. So started in door-to-door sales, did that for a little bit, and then ended up actually really excelling at it in B2B and door-to-door. And
what did you sell, if you don't mind me asking?
All kinds of stuff, man. So like it would be as crazy as, here's a box of toys, go business to business and sell this.
Okay.
Or it would be things like appointment setting for home improvements, right? Where go around saying, do you need windows, siding, roofing type things, where I would just schedule appointments.
Interesting.
It was kind of all over the place. And I kind of got into a very weird area where it was with auto glass, where we would actually go around and see if people had chips or cracks on their windshield and get them to repair or replace it through their insurance companies, and then outsource that to a glass company to do the work. So that's kind of where I broke off and created my own company.
I was gonna say that's the hard come up story for sure. I have somebody actually already chimed in. He's like, "Did you sell Kirby Vacuums by chance, or Bibles for that matter?"
No, yeah. I mean, it was tough. It was commission only for years. And then I created my own company and ended up having 2 locations and over 50 staff, and did that for a little bit in Florida. And then, at the time, because of the whole going against insurance companies and getting people to do claims, it was a really hard business. And a lot of insurance companies made it very difficult. It was very stressful. And I ended up getting out of that, because my dad was saying, hey, there's a new company in technology in Denver. And I've always been interested in technology because my family's been in that for a very long time. My mom's been at IBM she's about to retire, like 35, 36 years.
Oh.
My dad's been in technology for a very long time. And he convinced me, he's like, hey, you got to check this company out. He worked for McAfee at the time. And he's like, you gotta check out this company called MX Logic. It's a company that McAfee's about to acquire. Check them out. So went, did an interview with them, and loved the concept of what they were doing, how fast they were growing, and went and kind of started from scratch in an industry I didn't know, and learned to cold call and set appointments for enterprise. So I went from door to door owning a business to setting appointments for enterprise customers at MX Logic, and got really.
I assume your door to door history helped you there, right? I mean,
Yeah,
calling is usually not an easy job.
I thought it was a joke, honestly. I came on and everyone was struggling. I'm like, this is amazing. I'm sitting here drinking coffee, in with a roof over my head, right? Like this is pretty great. So yeah, did that for a little bit and excelled at that. Got into a channel account manager, managed MSPs, did that for a little bit, and then got recruited from some very early adopters of PAX 8 at the very early stages. John came from MX Logic. A lot of the other leadership did as well. They recruited me as one of the first salespeople at PAX 8. So when I came out of PAX 8, they kind of sold me on a very grand idea. And then I got there and there was no revenue. And I was one of two or three salespeople. So I was like, oh my God.
Just to remind people, because I get this question from time to time. PAX 8 kind of does not necessarily, it's not a couple of years old. This thing was back in 2012, I think, right?
Yeah, I just hit my 7-year anniversary today, actually. So I started October 1st, 2013. Yeah.
Yeah. So you were really early on.
Yeah, it was, like I said, I came in pre-revenue, $0 on the board. So went after a lot of my old MX Logic partners. That's how I got started. Going after my MX Logic guys. At the time, we didn't really have a whole lot of portfolio. We had Symantec. That was a tough conversation, convincing MSPs to purchase Symantec when, like 3 years prior to that, Symantec had a really bad, horrible, issue in the channel. So, an issue with their products. So it was tough. Had a few other vendors out there. Had I think 3 vendors. Them, Infrascale, BAE, which we sold against Office 365 by getting people to BAE's hosted exchange. At the time, though, Microsoft was still pretty new, right? 365.
I was going to say 365. I mean, there was Microsoft BPOS, right? Business Productivity Suite. And 365 didn't emerge until probably around the time PAX 8 started, sounds like.
Yeah, it was brand new. Like when I came on, it was still like people were like, I don't trust Microsoft. I don't trust 365. That was a lot of the conversation. So it was a different time for sure. But yeah, so started that out. Long story short, helped build the sales team, built out the whole, helped build the sales organization, and then did a transition because in that span of building the sales group, came across a lot of cool vendors and helped introduce some really interesting vendors to our line card early on. One of them was called ProfitBricks, which was a cloud-based alternative to like Azure or something like that. But it was early, so it was a very good solution at the time. And a few other vendors that I discovered. And I really loved that part of the business. I was like, I'm really interested in technology. That's where I love seeing where the market's going, getting ahead of it. And that was what really excited me. And so because PAX 8 has such an awesome culture, phenomenal, and an awesome leadership team, they like to put people in where they want to be, right? So it's like, get the talented people at the organization first, let them figure out what they want, get them in the right seat, right? And so that's kind of the direction I headed was on the product management side. And that's where I've been for about 3 years now. So helped out.
So basically any vendor that's interested in coming into the PAX 8, line card or space, you're the person that starts the conversation, goes through the vetting process, determines if there's a viability for both sides, and then, closes the deal kind of thing.
Yeah, I would call it like a buyer, right? So I'm like a buyer, right? So they come, they pitch their product, and there's a ton of them. And there's a lot of things that we go through, right? There's a technical evaluation, there's a business evaluation, there's a security evaluation. There's all kinds of things that we go through.
Well, let's expand on that for a second, because this comes kind of into our conversation, which is where's technology now? Where's it going? So, hey, listen, there's a lot of really smart people out there. We're in a time where people can bootstrap, right, and create something out of thin air, right? So when you go and determine hey, there's a need, or I'm looking to, fill something that solves a problem, what does that criteria look like, right? Like, is security the first thing you check the box on? Is it viable? Can you make can you make it work from an MSP view? Like, what is your mindset when you're looking for this?
Yeah, so this is an interesting question. So really, it's like, okay, who's our number one customer? That's an MSP. So if you look at our ecosystem, MSPs, vast majority of our customers. Okay. So what I look for first is, what are the minimum viable products that an MSP has to have to be able to do business with that vendor? Okay. And that is things, of course, multi-tenancy is the number one thing. So multi-tenant environment, a secure environment too, right? So security on that platform, how do you access it? What's the access controls like? What's RBAC like? All of those pieces, that's kind of fleshed out. Also, implementations have to be super simple. So it's either through an integration or just a simple implementation, because with small businesses having to do something 100 times over, if it's complex, it's just never going to get adoption, right? And so in the MSP market, it's not like finding one-off vendors here and there to sell. It's finding vendors that they can add to their stack, right? Because that's how a lot of MSPs go to market. So easy implementations, very secure access, multi-tenancy, those are the big ones. And then it gets much deeper from there. Being able to create policies across tenants is always nice, things like that. But it comes down to easy setup, easy onboarding, secure, and easy to manage, right? So,
Okay. So for those of you out there that are trying to figure out how you fit in the world, take some notes, right? Because these are things that are kind of obvious, but you don't think about it, right, until you hear it from the other side, I think.
the other piece that, I think a lot of it's in relation to us too, because we have to have APIs.
Yeah.
So if there's not APIs built out, then that's a kind of deal killer, or they have to build them. Two is like simple billing models, right? I think, we've brought on some vendors that we've had, not say issues, but challenges in getting that out to market because it's just very complex in billing, right? And so that's another piece is, if it's not a simple billing cycle, how can we work with the vendor to simplify as much as possible? How can we remove barriers to entry, like minimum buys and stuff like that? Like, we do as much as possible to make sure that the smallest MSP can get involved all the way to our largest partners. And that's the thing, is we have a very range of partners, from the one-man shops out there to, some of the biggest MSPs in the country, because we're about 12,000 MSPs now. So we have a lot of differentiation in our group. So we try to make sure that it goes across the board of partner type.
No, it's good. That's good news, because like you said, part of the whole story here is the MSP adopting internally, I assume, and then obviously then offering to their customer, right? So a lot of these guys start maybe small. We all started somewhere, right? And then obviously over time, they get more mature, they get larger, there's more people involved, and simplicity obviously is a big theme of so far everything you've said, right? Trying to make it easy to consume, easy to build, easy to deploy. Easy seems to be the magic word. So let's talk about that then, right? Because you're probably getting hit by 1,000 vendors. So you've seen a lot of stuff, right? Even stuff we probably haven't seen on the street, maybe. And so from a today standpoint, when you step back and you look at, you put yourself in the shoes of the IT service provider, MSP, whatever they want to call themselves, and they're trying to go out and sell to, what do you define SMB, by the way? Microsoft says it's 500 and below. Is that the right number for you? What do you call it?
I think really it's 250 and below, but I think once you start getting, what I really consider SMB is ones, in my personal opinion, and this could range from who you talk to at Pax8, but in my personal opinion, I think it's anyone without internal IT. Okay. So anyone without an internal IT, I would put them in one group, and that's sub 50. Okay. Sub 50 employees, no internal IT for most companies. Once 50 to 250, that's more of a co-managed relationship, right? Still, MSPs can get involved. It's just not as tapped yet. I think that a lot of partners are still figuring it out. And there's not a lot of great tools out there to get into those markets yet either, right? So, because remember, you're talking about co-management, which means you're going to have to delegate responsibilities of certain tasks to certain individuals. Reporting's a big deal. That there's a lot of things in that space that is still being worked on by a lot of vendors. So
I agree. So basically, sub 250, but really so two categories: has internal IT, doesn't have internal IT. Obviously, they're dealt with slightly differently. So that being said, with SMB in that, with those qualifications, what's the full view right now, right? Like, not to get super into Pax8, I know Alan Miller popped in. He's like, hey, does Pax8 have a line card similar to some of these other distributors? Yeah, go to their website. They have a pretty full listing there, Alan. I'll shoot you a link afterwards if you haven't stumbled onto it already. But like, if I'm an MSP, what are the missing gaps that you keep on stumbling into where, they're not checking the box, right? Is it multi-factor that's not standardized? Is it, they're not backing up cloud SaaS applications? Is it single sign-on? Like, where are the gaps? What are you seeing right now?
It's kind of a broad question because it depends where the vendor is coming from. So,
For sure. Well, I'm in the shoe of the MSP, right? Hey, I'm trying to fill out my offering.
Like, if the vendor anticipated they want to go after the small market, they probably understood that MSPs are the way to get there. Okay. And if they're going after the small business market, then a lot of stuff is already checked boxes wise from a management standpoint. But there's a lot of vendors in the enterprise, okay, that want to get to the SMB, but they are missing a lot to get there. And that is on their platform. They don't have the multi-tenancy. They don't have the ability to create templates and push out policies. They don't have easy deployments and easy sales cycles. Their pricing's really high. So those vendors might want the SMB, but they're missing a lot. Not all of them, but most of them.
So an example of this is like 4 years ago, if I was an MSP and I heard the word SIEM or SOC, that price point was astronomical. That's like $4,000 a month or something to get started, right?
Oh yeah.
Now it's 4 years later, it's completely different, right? Like, that's come down almost like TV prices have, right?
Yeah, well, I think it's also too that you have vendors you kind of have two different vendors. You have ones coming from bottom up and ones coming from top down, right? So ones coming from top down or enterprise down, those are going to struggle because they really haven't thought through how to get their price points low enough based on their technology. There's things, for example, with a SIM. The most expensive part of a SIM is data storage, okay? So if you think about why it's so expensive, it's because of what data they're collecting and what kind of logs they're collecting. So people that take it from the ground up approach say, I'm going after the small business mid-sized market. What is the minimum viable logs I need to get my price points to the point where I can hit this market, right? So that's kind of the difference in thought process, right? So I think what you're seeing is people are coming from the bottom up and creating tools for MSPs in the managed SOC offering, right? That's what you're seeing, more and more of that. You're not seeing so many huge vendors that have SIM and SOC tools getting down market. You're just not seeing it. Like, how many Alien Vault made a play, but that didn't really work out very well. Verizon acquired them, I believe, or AT&T.
AT&T, yeah.
Yeah. You see some of these vendors trying to get down, but most of them still haven't made it down market, right? So you're seeing a lot of the new vendors, new players saying, I have experience in this market. I've built stuff like this before in the enterprise. I'm going to break off from this company, start another company with the small business in mind and create a tool from them. That's what you're seeing.
Okay. So, I mean, things like MDM, right? Has that really been, come to fruition? How about, Apple device management? How about, there's this whole concept of zero trust, although it's marketed that way, but maybe not the case all the time. It just seems like, the guys who started MSPs in the mid to late 2000s, right? And the guys that started their MSPs in the last 3 or 4 or 5 years, it just seems like their view of the world is slightly different, right? I don't know if born in the cloud is the right term or not, but when they're looking at their sub 250, end customer, right? A lot of them are obviously now working remotely. We know that, right? But just because they can log into a web page from any computer on the planet and get to something doesn't mean it's necessarily managed, monitored, and secure. So, where's the struggle there, right? Like, what's your advice to the MSPs out there that are like, listen, this is getting really complicated and I'm struggling to understand where I fit in the game, kind of thing.
Yeah, so everyone thought cloud was going to make things easier, but it actually made things a lot harder, okay? And for I would say for different reasons. From a management standpoint, it's getting a lot harder because you have all these disparate systems that don't talk to each other, okay? And you have all these different SaaS applications that do a very specific thing. And there's nothing that kind of binds them together, right? You had the RMM vendors back in the day that did this with hardware, right? So they did this with workstations and servers and tried to merge this stuff. But that doesn't exist on the SaaS side yet. That's one big area where things are going, by the way. But I think that that's the hardest challenge is, as an MSP nowadays, I got to learn so many different things, and there's no common way for me to be able to manage these efficiently across my stack, right? I don't have consolidated reporting. I don't have consolidated management. How do I handle onboarding and offboarding? What does that look like, right? Across all these different SaaS vendors. How do I minimize my risk from like you mentioned, from a zero trust standpoint, which is all about identity management. By the way, that's a huge area. That's a big gap in our market. MSPs, if you really want to do this right, think of identity first. How do I control the identity of the user and what they access? Because with all these SaaS applications, there's a lot of security holes, right? If you fire an employee, how are you making sure that employee gets removed from all those SaaS applications?
It's interesting that you say that, Ryan, because our friend Matt Lee, who breathes security like it's it's water, he says that identity is the new firewall. Do you agree with that idea?
I agree. I think there's some context around that. I agree that identity management is probably one of the most core fundamental security practices you should be thinking about doing as an MSP. You should think of identity management as the core pillar before you start. Yes, there's security layers that you need to have. I'm not saying remove security layers at all. You have to have layered security, but identity management is the core part of all your security, right? So once I know who my user is and what they access, I can put conditional access policies to remove them, just like I can do with a firewall in a similar manner. But yes, people are remote now. Most customers are going to have a hybrid model. You're not going to see every single customer go back to all in office. You're going to have a hybrid. So because of that, is the firewall going to truly protect you against all your users? The answer is no, right? It's not. So in that scenario, what do I got to rely on? Well, I got to rely on identity management. I got to rely on access controls, SSO, multi-factor authentication, being very tight-knit on controlling go through and look at all my applications. What are critical applications that have very sensitive data? What don't? What do I need to make sure? Think about, okay, here's my list of the top 10 apps that this company has, and this is the data that hackers want really badly to have PII in them, for example. That's the stuff that I need to really think about. How do I make sure that my access control policies are really tight? And by the way, Microsoft has a great story around this with their whole Azure AD and conditional access policies and things like that. But I'm just saying, from general, when talking to a lot of MSPs, a lot of them haven't really dived into that yet, right? I think they already have SSO with Office 365. They have MFA with Office 365, but have they gone the extra step to say, what's my inventory of other SaaS applications? What else are they accessing? How do I make sure that when an employee gets on and offboarded, how do I try to automate most of that process? That's where I'm thinking is around. It's not around the day-to-day management. I think that's a component, but I think the bigger problem is, onboarding, offboarding, setting up, configuring. That's the real risk here.
There's definitely overlap, right? Because like you said, all these tools are decentralized. Just login and policy and security management we've been talking about, and I know there's this whole concept of SSO tax, right? Because not every application that you adopt as an MSP even gives that to you at the base level, right? You sometimes have to go way higher in the chart just to get access to that technology. And then another big problem around that is just keeping on top of, if we've let people go, did we go back and adjust our subscription to make sure that we're not being overbilled? Is there overlap? Am I paying for vendor services that I'm no longer now collecting because that person doesn't exist anymore? This creates a billing nightmare, really. I think that's the right word, right?
Yep. So not only does this affect security, but not only does it affect security, it affects your relationship with your customer, because think about a customer experience. If I want a new user and I hired someone, I forgot to tell you, do I have to wait 3 days for you to figure out how to configure this and turn it on, right? And bill me correctly? What if I fire someone? I want that person to not have access to my CRM and my certain stuff immediately, right? Do I have to wait 3 days to have my MSP do that? Like, yeah. So customer experience, right? Security, and like you said, billing. It all ties together, 100%.
Yeah, and that's a point that Brent chats in here. He says the gap is not the tools that you have; it's the construction of your solution, which comes back to you being able to manage the whole thing 360, right? He then chimes in and says there's a complexity, and then how does the MSP have to now turn around and worry about how the vendor's billing system fits how they're doing things, right? Like all of a sudden, there's a lot of potential potholes you can run into when you're trying to design your bundle of services, right? That you're stacking out to your customers.
And by the way, I mean, not to plug my company, but this is literally what we focus on. I mean, this is what we're trying to focus is remove the chaos across vendor management and vendor. I mean, we focused on billing, but that's going to change, by the way. We've been so dead set on billing and that piece of it, but you'll see other area of focus coming on soon. So.
Yeah, Brent just popped in and said he had a vendor that just double billed him, and he had to go back and figure it out and unwind that. But so the framework's important, right? That's a big part of this conversation. That if you can't bring something in, report it, automate it, manage it, and bill for it, you're already in trouble, right? Because you can't scale it, right? Unless you're a very small company, only handling a handful of companies, downstream from you, but then. Are you ever, are you actually at a point where you can get past, that glass ceiling, right? Is there any hot technologies on the roadmap, right? Is there anything that's like on the cusp of really becoming affordable at the sub 250 employee level that are just about to hit the MSP industry? Anything that come to mind?
Well, I don't want to give away secret sauce of vendors that I'm working on just because
No, don't do that.
But I will say that there is absolutely what you're seeing right now in the market is I think a lot of different you're going to see this in different areas. Okay. You're going to see this in different vendors that see this gap. Okay. There is a big gap here. Okay. The whole SaaS sprawl, this is a big problem. Okay. In the enterprise, this has been tackled already, by the way. It's already been tackled. Okta. It's been tackled, okay? Maybe not on the billing side as much as you would think, but from an access control and things like that, they're kind of leading the charge on that. And Microsoft's kind of following their lead, okay? When it comes to provisioning, deprovisioning, access controls, and onboarding and offboarding, okay? But in the SMB space, it's not there yet, okay? Not to say it's not being worked on, it absolutely is, and it's being worked on by several different companies you may not expect, okay? And you'll see this you'll probably start to see this, I don't know how long this is gonna take, but I would say by probably middle of next year to next year, you're gonna see a lot of emerging technologies that focus on this. I've already seen it in multiple areas, but yeah, I would say that that is probably the biggest gap in the market right now that I've seen is solving the gap for this sprawl of SaaS and how do you manage it as an MSP effectively. That's where I see the biggest growth and that coupled with automation, right? So, I think you're going to see a lot of vendors on the workflow automation space get into this. But creating workflows and automating tasks, that's going to be huge, right? Microsoft just did a big play with Power Automate and their whole Power Platform. The amount of rebates they just announced is insane. I mean, they have really big rebates there if you're a silver or gold partner. So they're incentivizing that, and that is so you got kind of two things. You got this, okay, SaaS sprawls one, then you got this whole thing because they don't communicate to each other. I got two problems. I got the onboarding, offboarding, which is one piece. And I also have how do these tools communicate? MSPs, the industry's done this in ways like with ticketing, for example. If a vendor throws off a security alert, it'll open up a ticket That's one workflow, but there's many workflows out there that you can connect your ecosystems through workflow automation tools, right? So I think you're going to start. I've already seen this from some of our top MSPs. They've automated a lot of the processes, a lot of the manual processes, and unfortunately, like if you look at where partners that I talk to spend most of their times, it's not on break fix. It's on doing the little tedious work on, like I mentioned, onboard, offboard, project based work. I mean, there's a lot of time spent on very manual, tedious tasks. And in order for this industry to really grow to the next step is we got to focus on automating those tasks.
Interesting. So, I mean, obviously trusted advisor has been a concept for a long time. Obviously business advisor has been a concept, right? How much of this is the MSP getting more into the actual ERP, CRM, line of business app, business, right? In order to start customizing that for the end customer.
So this is actually where I'm thinking the industry, I hope it goes here, because if you look at the SaaS spend of an MSP, okay, or just the total IT spend, okay, I forget who came out with this. I think maybe Forrester or a few other vendors. MSPs have a very small percentage of the overall SaaS spend. You're getting maybe what? You're getting the infrastructure, you're getting backup, you're getting security. Are you getting marketing tools? Are you getting the marketing spend they're spending on? Are you getting the line of business app spend? No. Okay. Well, why is that? The reason why is because typically you didn't really have a value prop there, right? You weren't doing support, you weren't doing billing. It just didn't make a lot of sense. You want to stay away from support, right? Because that's not really your business. However, once you start getting into access controls, right? Once you start getting into onboard, offboard policies and automation and making sure that this is security, by the way, when you onboard and offboard a new user, I need to make sure that it gets done correctly with the right permissions and right setup in the front end. And then when that person leaves, to make sure that the data is protected, right? It's saved, it's moved to the right place, and communications externally are set up as well, right? And this also falls into compliance. So when you talk about that, now an MSP can, I think the MSPs could easily take that conversation to say, give me all your SaaS spend, because I'm going to be in the middle of onboarding, offboarding your SaaS and access controls. And by the way, if I can bill it, why wouldn't you want me to bill for it all? Right?
Yeah, but could you imagine? I mean, there's whole industries around this stuff, Ryan. I mean, being a Salesforce person, I mean, they have like their own groove, right? There's a whole layer of advisors around that, or being a HubSpot guru, or being a dynamic CRM guy, right? That used to be its own, I think it's its own competency still for Microsoft, right? So it's not as turnkey as you would think, right?
No, they're called TPIs, third-party implementers, right? So no, you're right. I don't expect an MSP never to get into this sort of stuff of very rarely you're going to get MSPs that want to actually set up and configure CRM systems. Mm-hmm. But if an MSP had a list of third-party implementers that were trusted by that vendor, you could merge that conversation, right? Sure. I think that the MSP has the opportunity to build a SaaS, even though you may not support it, and bring in a third-party implementer or a third-party consultant to help with that journey of that one application, right? I think that's where they fit. I don't anticipate them getting too far in the weeds of those solutions, because if you look at business, like especially line of business apps, that gets very niche very quickly. Like, yeah. You peel the onion back and say, okay, this is a healthcare, yes, but no, it's actually a veterinary clinic, and they need this very specific veterinary software. Like, that's just impossible to scale. You got to be able to support and do the same kind of role you have with what you do today is billing support. You got to be able to offer the same value, and the only way to do that is through partnerships.
For sure. I mean, there's got, like, on the larger end, right? You've heard of guys who, we know of larger MSPs that have taken things like ServiceNow, right? And have completely customized ServiceNow for the end customer and delivering that as a service, right? I mean, that's a little bit deeper than just giving them a portal to submit tickets, for sure. But it's like they're getting into the SaaS business themselves.
Yeah. I see that. I'm seeing this on like the Microsoft stack. I'm seeing this on Dynamics quite a bit. We have some big partners that a Dynamics practice that is kind of emerging. We also see this on the Power Automate platform. So, when you think about the whole platform with Microsoft, it's not just workflow automation. There's actually bots, right? So you have this whole RPA field that's going to come out, which is robotic process automation. And that is taking things that don't have APIs and using a robot to connect the two systems to say, I'm going to pull the data from here and push it to here. So this is essentially another field that I think MSPs have the ability to do. Is this is kind of a hybrid between an MSP and a developer, right? That doesn't know code. You don't have to know code anymore. These are all low code, no code tools. You could say, hey, tell me what you want to automate, and then we'll figure out how to automate it. And then there's really cool tools that Microsoft has built out and other vendors to make it pretty easy to do. I know we're building a whole pro service department on this, on some automating a lot of these tasks. But yeah, I think that's an area that partners have the ability to do. I think you're going to see the smart ones start taking advantage of this. I think they should start with themselves first, figure out how to automate their business processes as much as possible. And then from there, learn it, understand how they work, and then go and do that for your customer. Because, a lot of these, the key here is use technology to automate manual processes. You're going to help your customer. You're going to help yourself. You're going to save your customer money. They're going to be able to grow faster. There's all kinds of cool stuff to do here. So
very interesting. So there's a couple of things we brought up earlier in the week. We had Matt Lee and Ken Patterson on from your org. Talk about Lighthouse for a second, right? It looks like Microsoft's starting to maybe figure out some of the things that are missing from the downstream kind of small business bubble, right? Or maybe even MSP view. There's a little bit of concern out there that maybe Microsoft's trying to, take the bottom end of things, right? Take the customer direct on Intune, take the customer direct on virtual desktop. I'm not sure how many MSPs find that as a, hey, let's not waste our time there and work upstream, or, hey, I'm really concerned about them, kind of stealing my lunch. But big picture, what do you see now of the Microsoft camp?
Well, first off, I wouldn't be worried about Microsoft taking your customer. Like, I think I watched the video of you and someone else the other day. Don't have that concern at all. I talk to Microsoft all the time. They do not want to talk to your customers, okay? They have their direct store, but it is like such a second, like they don't want that, right? The reason why they built this whole CSP program and the reason why they're merging, by the way, they're merging all their SKUs. So they're converting all their CSP, everything is moving to CSP. Every SKU that Microsoft sells is going to be merged into CSP, okay? And they've been working on this for a while. So all of their server licensing, all of their standard software licensing, that's all going to move to CSP, okay? And the reason why is Microsoft doesn't want to deal with the small guys. They don't have the time to scale. This is why distribution exists and why MSPs exist. You got to have the ability to scale. It's just too expensive. For them to go and talk to a small customer, they lose their money in seconds of talking or in a few minutes of talking to that customer, right? So it's all about scalability and reach. MSPs, I mean, Microsoft said they make 7 to 10x on services on just the software. So if you're paying Microsoft $20 a month, you're probably billing your customer $150 to $200 a month. That means that you have the ability to talk to that customer because you're making money in other places. But the vendor, they don't have that kind of same margin to make that couple bucks. If that support erodes their margin very quickly, right? So they have to be able to use distribution and MSPs to get to the small business, okay? Period. I mean, that's a part of their plan. It's pretty obvious. They are taking big customers direct, but what you're seeing with Microsoft is that number keeps going up and up and up. So you're starting to see them start pushing out a lot of these, I would call them mid-market customers to CSPs, okay? It's not official.
So what's the number of a customer that really is Microsoft would be, inclined to take direct? Is it 1,000 people? Is it 500? Is it 10,000? What's that magic number? Do you know?
I mean, I don't want to say the magic number.
Okay.
It's not official. But I'll just say, okay, if you're within 250 to 1,000 or maybe 2,000 seats, I think you're pretty safe. Once you get to those bigger bigger logos, Microsoft wants those direct, right?
Yeah.
But that's kind of what you see in that market. So I wouldn't be too worried about it. Because of this, they realized that, and this has been a realization for a while now, they realized that what's the right partner to get to this segment? It's MSPs. It's not the consultants, it's not this and that, it's MSPs. And so they've actually been investing quite heavily in MSPs. And what you talked about was with the Azure Lighthouse for M365, that's the first kind of showing to say, hey guys, we're paying attention, okay? That's kind of the writing on the wall to say, we're not ignoring you anymore. We're building something for you, okay? Partner Center was the first take at that. There's a lot to be desired there, to be honest with you. But that's getting better. And then the next thing is this whole multi-tenant management portal that they're building. And it's kind of interesting, and I'm a part of their advisory, and I hear what they're building and where their strategy is, so I kind of know where it's going. They're 100% focused on MSPs. Absolutely. They know that MSPs are the way they get to this market, and they're going to invest in this. They already have invested heavily in that, and they just showed you a little bit of taste of what they're doing. Now, me personally, I think they started in the wrong area. They started with Windows Defender and Defender reporting and device compliance reporting. That's great, but that doesn't really help you if you're not using Intune, right?
Yeah.
So if you're using Intune, that's great. I think MSPs absolutely should investigate Intune and 100% should start getting trained on Intune, because it will get to a point where, yes, this is a very powerful tool that will help you immensely in the future, not only for managing devices, but also automating a lot of the processes for onboarding machines, right? So like things like Windows Autopilot, it's just, they have a huge engineering team. I mean, it's massive. And they are chipping away and building these products faster than any software vendor I've ever seen. And it's going to be exciting. I think the future is going to be bright, and I think Microsoft's going to rip a lot of vendors apart here in the next few years. I mean, I think now that they understand the MSP market is a focus for them, some vendors need to watch out, and it's from the big boys. It's from Microsoft.
No, it's good to know. So, so obviously the takeaways from here are Microsoft's not coming after your business's MSPs, or don't consider that to be the case. Figure out how to work with them, not against them. 2, Intune, if you haven't looked at it recently or at all, time to start digging into it, because there's a chance that that's going to save a lot of time moving forward. And I'm assuming with announcements with people like SolarWinds that came out at the last conference, stuff like that, these RMM and these bigger kind of MSP-centric vendors are just going to tie in, right? Instead of trying to reinvent.
They have to.
Yeah.
I mean, if they want to stay relevant.
Question that came in from Brent: what licensing includes Intune? Isn't a base level of that involved in even Business Premium?
M365 Business Premium, the $20 SKU. Yep, that includes Intune, includes all your device management. And here's where Intune's really exciting, okay? It's super secure because it ties into Azure Active Directory and conditional access policies, okay? So why this gets really important is because when you look at the big picture, you got identity management at the core, okay? Users have SSO, have MFA, they have access. Then I can put some really cool conditional access policy, if-then statements. If this happens, then disallow access, okay? That's what Zero Trust is. Don't trust anybody. The only time they can come in and get access to something is if they prove they are who they say they are. That's really what Zero Trust is. And so when you look at that, the identity is the core. We'll extend that to the devices. That's what Intune is doing. Intune is extending that functionality to device policies, to compliance policies. So I could say, hey, my compliance policy for this device has to check off these 10 boxes to prove they are who they say they are to get access, right? So you're now taking very simple workflows to say, yes, I hit MFA. Great, you talk about two-factor. That's two-factor. What about 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 10, 20 factors, right? That's where we're going. That's where we're going to the point where you got to have the right device. The device has to be in the right health, in the right location. All these sort of things kind of tie together to say, then you can access, right? And so that's how you're staying ahead of hackers is by stuff like this.
And then the last thing was Lighthouse, which they literally announced it publicly, 4 or 5 days ago. I mean, it's fairly new announcement. I don't think they're charging extra for this. Is that true, Ryan? And it's just lighthouse.microsoft.com or something.
It's beta, right? So you can sign up for the beta or the early access, which you guys should. If you're using Intune, absolutely, it's phenomenal to start getting a view on things. Really, where they're starting is consolidating reporting across tenants, which is a great start. But that's going to go much further in the future. But the starting point is get a view of your compliance policies, your device compliance policies, what they look like, and then also Defender data. So start pulling in, things that you would typically see in an RMM with a third party. Is they're doing it with their core Microsoft product. They also announced too, they're opening up a lot of APIs to third-party vendors. So you're going to start seeing that it's not just going to be so Microsoft centric. You're going to be able to pull other vendors into this ecosystem if you're able to build APIs with APIs. But that also opens the door for vendors, right? So, like you said, SolarWinds. Let's hope that these RMM vendors, and of course they are, this is an opportunity for them.
I mean, listen, if the door's open for them to connect, right? I mean, it only makes what they can do better, right? If they can piggyback on the Microsoft stuff that's just being built in.
Against them. That's what I was trying to say is if you compete against them, you're going to lose. But if you work with them, you're going to do fine.
And then the other thing that you mentioned, which is interesting, some of the licensing that used to be more like Microsoft Open, right, or Microsoft Value, where you'd have to do things like SPLA or, some of the license keys, right, renewal, stuff like that. It sounds like that's coming over into the Microsoft 365 as a service portal, basically, the whole ecosystem. So you're not having to go and acquire that separately. Is that true?
That's right. That's what they're finalizing now. They're finalizing merging all their different purchasing ecosystems into the CSP marketplace. So that is coming. Stay tuned on that. Something that we're working on internally to get that, but they're not final. They haven't finalized it all yet, but it is in the works. And they announced that at Inspire. Gabrielle had a whole talk about that, how everything's getting merged into CSP.
So I'm going to throw a word out there that's kind of out of left field. What about the Surface line? Where does that fall into all of this?
I don't know. I'm a little outside of my scope, so I don't know. I don't know if the Surface. That's a good question. I should follow up on that. I don't know where the Surface line does that fall into CSP or not. I would really like that. Pretty awesome.
Cool. Device as a service for Microsoft, right? I mean, they announced the new Surface, like the hinged phone. There's been some cool, news about that coming.
Yeah, I use a Surface. I like it. It's been pretty good. You don't have enough ports though. That's the only bummer.
Yeah, agree. I have one right here. I could use a couple extra ports. So you have PAX 8, circling back to that side. Some of the guys at the top of the PAX 8 ecosystem, right? The MSPs that are all in PAX 8, we call it. When you talk to those guys on a regular basis, I think there's like 8 or 10 of them that you talk to regularly. Where are you seeing their situations going, right? Is their MMR going up per user? Are they starting to go heavily towards security? Like that seems to be the trend across the industry. Where are they seeing success versus not so much success? Just so that everybody else can understand where the guys that are doing well seem to be doing, gangbusters at.
I mean, I think common denominator is their customers are getting a lot larger. That's exciting, right? So they're definitely getting into that whole co-managed space, which is great to see. It's phenomenal to see that we could potentially take this MSP market up a notch and stop feeding on the small businesses, but go up to the mid-markets. By the way, these mid-market customers that have internal IT, when they went through budget cuts, do you know who got hit the hardest? Is IT. So you have these big customers that had maybe 5 or 6 guys that maybe it's now one guy right now freaking out, sweating every day, not sleeping because they cut most of his department, right? So internal IT is absolutely going to start evaluating. It already has. Our MSPs, by the way, if you're not marketing already, you need to market, okay? Because these mid-market customers or these bigger customers, they are looking to outsource some of their work to MSPs. It's cheaper for them, okay? So I think that's the big takeaway I have is partners are moving up market, which is great. They're also spending a lot of money on marketing, which that's a common denominator. They're marketing heavily, which, you know, if you're looking to grow, you need to start with getting your presence known out there so they can find you. The other thing I've seen is, yeah, I mean, security is a no-brainer. A lot of them are getting into the whole 24/7 SOC, and they're outsourcing it, most of them, right? It's very hard to build that internally. Very, very expensive. But yeah, so that's one thing. The whole SOC as a service, great opportunity, big market. I think that's growing like crazy. You have, because I mean, outsourcing this is great, because MSPs not necessarily are the person that wants 24/7 eyes on glass. They can't afford it. They don't have the expertise. That's a big opportunity. And then going up market, I think co-managed tools, there's some technology out there to showcase some reporting and things they can do with mid-market customers that could be exciting. Is if I have a mid-market customer, how do they know what I'm doing for them? How do I show my value? How do I co-manage? How do I give them certain access and me have other access? Like, that's going to be a thing, and there's some vendors that they're tackling that. What else am I seeing? I mean, the whole concept of automation is high on the list, right? So, you know, you're seeing these MSPs trying to automate as much as possible in their own business practices. And that's, I mean, primarily, like I said, RMMs have done a lot of that from the on-prem world, but now on the SaaS world, that's where a lot of people are spending their time. And identity management, that's huge. So you'll see, like, I mean, you know, you don't see this on the small end of the spectrum, but our bigger partners are absolutely eyeing some of the big identity management players, and outside of Microsoft, which, it's interesting. I think, you know, Microsoft is a little behind on that, right? There's some vendors from a IDP standpoint for SSO and MFA and policies where they are ahead of Microsoft. But the smart ones are not saying I'm gonna replace Microsoft. They're tying into Microsoft, right? So they kind of work hand in hand with Microsoft.
What about you know, Azure, virtual desktop, that, you know, that whole stack of stuff? Is that really seeing this, or is it? Yeah.
You know, from what I've seen, it's definitely growing. It's a growing market for sure. I think what I've seen is partners a little confused at when to offer what versus the other, right? So it's like, okay, why would I go down a WVD route versus just going down a route of providing them 365? What is the determining factor there? That's where I see a little bit of struggle. I think, you know, some partners to have a very consistent, unified way to manage stuff really like WVD, right? And for BYOD policies, it's phenomenal. When you think about, I think the easiest checkbox to think about is if you have a bunch of people on their own devices, like WVD, Windows Virtual Desktop's perfect, because you don't have to touch the device. I mean, you're essentially accessing a virtual desktop that's self-contained, self-secured, that doesn't touch that end user's device. So, you know, I think that's where partners should be thinking. Is this by BYOD or not? And if it's BYOD, I should think about WVD. I should be thinking about Intune, things like that. Let me see. Oh, the other thing I forgot is that, and you know, Teams is a mass adoption. That's a hockey stick. I mean, that's Microsoft's biggest growth area out of anything is Teams.
For sure. And they've definitely dumped a ton of marketing in it. Right time, right place, I think. Not that we were wishing a pandemic on anyone. For sure. So anything, you know, kind of, you know, best advice and, you know, most exciting things to look forward to, you know, going into next year, right? So best advice, hey, you know, MSPs, definitely do this versus anything else if you can. And hey, just pay attention to 1, 2, or 3 if we haven't already mentioned it.
Start getting up to speed on identity management, either Azure AD or others. Spend time just learning about it. Learn about SAML and OpenID and how these tools work, and just start preparing yourself for that. Because I mean, enterprise has been doing this for a long time, but MSPs not so much. So I'd say absolutely start looking at identity management tools. Start looking at Intune, like you mentioned. That's going to be really popular for device management, and coupling that with identity management. And then Outsourcing security. I mean, SOC as a service, that's going to be a big one. I think getting some of that work off your plate to experts is a smart idea. And with the price points, like you mentioned, they're coming down significantly. So now it's to the point where
Yeah, like dollars per user rather than thousands of dollars. Like it's night and day from where it was literally 4 years ago. I'm just shocked actually by that.
oh, it's ridiculous. Like it's super affordable. It's so affordable now that you can throw it into your stack. You don't even have to raise your end user cost, and I guarantee you it's going to save you money just on time savings.
Yeah, for
You
sure.
alert fatigue. It reduces alert fatigue. I really like the vendors who've gone out and said, I don't need to replace your tools. I like the vendors who say, just give me your tool data. Give me all the tools that you use today, plug it into my system, and I'll manage it for you. That is a great idea. That's great because that hit what I said earlier. Time to deploy. I don't have to rip and replace anything, right? All I got to do is connect my vendors into this SOC provider and boom, I'm off and running. So,
Interesting, yeah. That sounds like a win, really, honestly.
the other, so outsource security. What else am I thinking? What else? That was probably the big one. Identity management, Intune, outsource security, they're probably the big ones. Oh, and then like I said, workflow automation, and start thinking about onboarding and offboarding policies. How do I I mean, there was a thread on Reddit that came up the other day. I loved it. I was like, finally, someone's talking about this. What is an onboard and offboard policy? Like, what do you do for onboarding? When someone needs a new user for Microsoft, what does that look like? It's a good question.
I've heard things like 4 to 6 hours per user to onboard, but if that time could be cut down in half, you're already way ahead, right? Or even better than that. So be real interested to see if any of that could be automated. For like you said, some of these guys upstream have entire platforms for this, right? They tie all their tools in, and then HR just puts a new person in, and then all of a sudden the wheels spin, right? Not too much at our level.
Literally, some of these guys are connecting directly with the HR software vendors. They don't even have to put a ticket in. They just say, go into your ADP software and create a user, and that creates a ticket for me, and it just runs a whole automation script, right? So, yeah, it's exciting. It's pretty cool because I think what's really great is this is going to impact MSP's bottom line significantly because they're going to be able to profit a lot more, right?
100%. So a couple questions coming out of here. Alan Miller asked earlier, hey, do you have a list of vendors per category? I don't know if it's spelled out on the website or something like that. Where can you find that?
Yeah, it's on our website, packstate.com. Just go to vendors. Under vendors, there's literally categories. You can select your categories. And then once you click your categories, if you scroll halfway down, there's subcategories. So if I want to say, go to security, you'll see our security dashboard. You go down and say, okay, I want to look at identity management. Click identity management. It'll show you. So yeah.
And Alan, if you're having trouble with that, I know Ken Patterson's on here. Connect with him, and I'm sure he'll get you in the right place.
I will say the only one that's really hard for us to describe is Microsoft because it cuts across all the categories.
Yeah.
So just know that like if Microsoft's not displayed on one of the subcategories, there's a good chance they have it. It's just the way that our logic works. It's a little hard to get them everywhere, but they are. They're kind of everywhere.
Kent asked the question earlier on the show. Maybe you'll take it offline. He was asking if you had a particular vendor in your potential line card, maybe down the line. But I'll have him send you a message directly, which comes to the question. Hey Ryan, how do people get a hold of you?
Yeah, I mean, start with our website. That's the easiest way to do it. There's a lot of paths to get to someone quickly. We spent a lot of time focusing on workflows to say, you fill out a form, we're going to get right back to you instantly, right? We're trying to really be proactive and good partner experience at the forefront. So, but yeah, thanks for the time, man, George. I really appreciate it. It's been fun.
Awesome. Appreciate your time, Ryan. I know you're a busy guy. Everyone, this whole session was recorded. So if you want to go back and rewind and pick apart some of the ideas, definitely go to mspinitiative.com. You'll find our YouTube page. You'll find our Facebook page. These videos are available on like every platform that you're probably LinkedIn, etc. Keep online every Tuesdays and Thursdays. We do these sessions live. Of course, they're pre-recorded or they're post-recorded. You can go back and watch them. Stay tuned for some future news. Yes, Ryan.
One shout out I have to. We just launched tier 2 tickets and help desk buttons. Automate your ticketing system. Remove a lot of the manual work for troubleshooting tier 1. Fantastic vendor. Check them out.
Newest addition to the line card, it sounds. Guys, it's end of our session. Wish we had more time. Come back to us on Tuesday. We'll have more for you. Talk soon, Ryan.